My name is Kiravan, and the call came at 7:12 Tuesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen, one hand on a coffee mug, the other holding my phone so tightly my knuckles hurt. The nurse said my father had suffered sudden heart failure during the night. No warning, no second chance. Gone for a few minutes. I forgot how to move. Then I remembered where I worked. By 8:40, I was outside Marissa Cole's office at Alden Bridge Systems, trying to swallow the lump in my throat before I knocked. Marissa was our operations director, the kind of woman who measured people in deadlines, not grief. She didn't look up when I stepped inside. I need 4 days off, I said, my voice rough. My dad passed away this morning. The funeral is in Indiana. It's a long drive, and I have to help with arrangements. Her fingers kept tapping. If you're wondering how a single cold sentence from Marissa turned my grief into the beginning of Alden Bridge's collapse, stay with me and like this video. Where are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Because what she said next changed everything. You can take 2. I stared at her. 2 days won't cover the travel. She finally looked up, annoyed, more than concerned. Then attend remotely. Most services stream now for a second. The room went silent except for the hum of her desk lamp. This is my father, I said. He raised me alone after my mother died. I'm not watching his funeral through a screen. Marissa leaned back. Kira, we're in the middle of the Crestline migration. Everyone is making sacrifices. Sacrifices. 3 years of late nights, weekends, sick days. I never took systems I built because nobody else knew how. And now my father's burial was just another scheduling inconvenience. I nodded. Fine, I whispered. 2 days. But as I turned toward the door, something inside me went cold. She thought I had accepted her terms. She had no idea what I was about to take back. Of course, this story is fictional, shaped with the help of AI to make it more dramatic, emotional, and meaningful. But what matters most is the truth behind the lesson. I hope you can feel that as the story unfolds. Now, let's continue. I stepped out of Marissa's office with my mouth closed because if I opened it, something ugly would come out. The hallway outside was the same hallway I had walked every morning for 3 years, but that day it looked different, like somebody had turned up the lights on every lie I had trained myself not to notice. The gray carpet was worn thin. A faded poster beside the copier said, "We win together." Though I could name people who had cried after being blamed for failures they had warned management about. Another poster promised respect, ownership, balance. I almost laughed at that last word. At my desk, I could see the stress ball HR had handed out during Mental Wellness Week. Mine was still sitting beside my keyboard, untouched, ridiculous around me. People kept typing, smiling at screens, pretending the air wasn't heavy. Darren from Analytics glanced up, saw my face, and quickly looked away. He knew. Everyone always knew when something cruel had happened here. They just learned not to get involved. I stood there with my hand on the back of my chair. My monitor was still open to the Crestline migration dashboard. Red warnings, broken sync logs, pending client tickets. Problems I had been fixing quietly for months. While Marissa took credit in executive meetings, and Hal Whitmore called it team progress. For 1 second, habit almost won. I almost sat down. I almost pushed my grief into some locked corner of my body and started working like I always did. Then I saw my father's name still glowing on my phone screen from the hospital call, and everything inside me went still. I picked up my bag, slid my badge from the desk drawer, and looked once more at the office that had mistaken my loyalty for weakness. Then I walked past my chair, past the dashboard, past the posters, and straight toward the exit. Outside, the evening air felt too quiet. Like the whole city had decided not to witness me falling apart. I drove home without turning on the radio at my apartment. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, left my shoes in the hallway, and stood in the dark until the refrigerator hum became the only sound in the room. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard Marissa saying, "Then attend remotely." Like my father was a meeting link, like the man who taught me how to ride a bike and balance a checkbook could be reduced to a pixelated livestream. At 2:30 a.m., I sat up. My laptop was on the small table by the window. I opened it, signed into the remote portal, and waited while the screen loaded. My hands were steady now. That surprised me. The grief was still there, sharp and heavy, but beneath it was something colder. I went only to the folders that belonged to me, not client records, not company-owned code, not confidential files, just my own manuals, my private troubleshooting notes, my training outlines, my personal process maps. The checklists I had built after hours because Alden Bridge never bothered to document anything properly. The guides that kept Crestline from collapsing every other week. The explanations Marissa never read but loved, pretending she understood. I copied what was mine, removed the versions I had voluntarily shared, and left nothing behind that I had not been paid, asked, or authorized to create for them. No drama, no threats, just a quiet correction of ownership. Around 5:58 a.m., I created one plain note in the empty folder. Documentation removed by original author. No personal materials remain available. I stared at that sentence for a long moment. Then I closed the window, logged out, and watched the first gray line of morning creep across my apartment wall. If you think I went too far by taking back the personal work I built with my own time and effort, comment. You're too selfish. But if you believe me, if you understand why I finally chose myself, write Kira's right. I need to know I'm not alone. By the time the sun rose, the apartment had turned pale and quiet. I sat at my table with the laptop open, staring at a blank email like it was the last door between the person I had been and the person I was about to become. Subject: formal resignation. That was all I needed. I didn't write a speech. I didn't explain what Marissa had done. I didn't list the weekends I had lost, the dinners I had missed, the migraines I had worked through, or the fixes that had kept Alden Bridge systems breathing while people like Hal Whitmore smiled in client meetings and called it leadership. One typed 2 short paragraphs, effective immediately. I resigned from my position at Alden Bridge Systems. All company access may be terminated upon receipt of this notice. Any future communication regarding professional services should be directed to my personal email. No warmth, no gratitude, no pretending this place had shaped me into anything except exhausted. I attached the letter, read it once, and hit send for a few seconds. Nothing. Once payment clears, we begin. Thursday morning, arrived under a low white sky. I put on the black dress I had packed in a hurry, and my father's denim jacket over it. Even though it did not match, it smelled like cedar, dust, and the mint gum he kept in his truck. The chapel in Bloomington was smaller than I remembered. Same stained glass windows, same wooden doors, same aisle I had walked down years earlier when we buried my mother. Back then, my father had held my hand so tightly I could feel his wedding ring against my palm. This time, there was no one beside me. People came anyway. Mrs. Avery from next door hugged me first and told me Dad had shoveled her driveway every winter before sunrise. A man from the community college said Dad had repaired half the broken machines in their workshop and never asked to be paid. One of his old fishing friends brought a folded photo of them standing beside a muddy river, both of them grinning like boys. Then Mr. Leland, my high school shop teacher, stepped close. His hair had gone silver, but his voice was the same. Your father talked about you every time I saw him. He said, Kira built something no one else could build. That's what he always said. He was so proud of you. That broke me more than the hymns. After the service, I walked behind the chapel to the shed where Dad used to store lumber for volunteer projects. On a dusty bench sat a walnut pendant, half sanded, with a pencil mark where the hole should have been drilled. I recognized the shape. He had shown me the sketch weeks ago and said it was almost ready. I picked it up and held it against my chest. That evening, I sat at his workbench with sandpaper in my hand. I did not rush. I smoothed the edges stroke by stroke, finishing what he had started for me. Friday morning, I was back at my father's kitchen table. The pendant rested beside my laptop. Smoother now, still unfinished, but no longer rough enough to cut skin. At 9 o'clock sharp, I joined the first prepaid consulting call. This time, the room was full. Hal was there. Marissa was there. 2 engineers I barely recognized. A project manager from Crestline sat in silently with her camera off. Nobody smiled. Let's begin, I said. I shared my screen and opened the first workflow diagram I had rebuilt for the session. Not the original file, a clean teaching version limited to what they had paid for. I walked them through the sync failure that had been triggering false completion reports, then the broken API call that had been patched 3 different ways by 3 different people, then the reporting script that kept pulling stale regional data because someone had deleted the fallback logic in February. I flagged this in March. I said. Hal lowered his eyes. Marissa tried once to interrupt. Can we skip the history and just get to the fix? No, I said. You are paying for clarity, not shortcuts. The history is why the fix matters. After that, she stayed quiet for almost 2 hours. I answered questions in a calm, even voice. I explained what each failure meant, what risks were still open, and which assumptions would break the moment Crestline tried to scale. No anger, no softness either. Just facts delivered to people who should have listened months ago. When the session ended, Howell leaned toward his camera. We'll need you again Monday to finish the remaining items. I'm not available Monday. Marissa frowned. Kira, this is still urgent. So is my father's estate. I have a meeting with his attorney Monday morning. Hal swallowed. Could we work around that? You can send questions in writing. I'll respond during the next contracted window. The silence that followed was almost peaceful. Then I clicked leave meeting before anyone could mistake my boundaries for negotiation. By Tuesday afternoon, Crestline had delayed the launch and threatened to walk if Aldenbridge missed one more recovery milestone. Hal looked like he had aged 5 years in a week. Marissa barely spoke until the final 15 minutes of our call. Then Hal cleared his throat. We've been discussing your future here. I almost laughed. Marissa leaned closer to her camera. Director of Systems Operations, fully remote. 3 direct reports to start. 50% salary increase. You would report to Hal and join executive planning meetings. There it was. The seat at the table they had guarded for years, finally offered like a life raft after they were already drowning. I looked at them for a long moment. You're not offering this because you value me, I said. You're offering it because losing me scared you. Hal opened his mouth, then closed it. You had 3 years to see what I was doing. You saw the late nights. You saw the gaps I filled. You saw the warnings I sent, but you only called it leadership material after I took my work and left. Marissa's face softened. But too late. I buried my father while you were counting failed work, I said. That tells me everything. Hal asked quietly. Is there any version of this offer you would consider? No. The word felt clean. A month later, I accepted a position at a small firm in Columbus. On my second interview, the CEO asked how I was holding up after losing my father before asking when I could start. That was the difference. 6 months later, the walnut pendant sat finished on my desk. Not perfect, solid like him. And for the first time in years. So was I. Sometimes the moment you stop begging to be valued is the moment you finally remember your own worth. This story taught me that loyalty should never mean abandoning yourself, especially for people who only notice your value when they lose access to it. First, I learned that grief deserves respect, not negotiation. No deadline should be treated as more important than saying goodbye to someone you love. Second, I learned that boundaries are not cruelty. Taking back what you built, protecting your time, and choosing your peace can be an act of survival. Third, I learned that real appreciation shows up before a crisis, not after desperation sets in. What about you? Did this story leave you with a lesson of your own? Share it in the comments. I truly want to read it. And if this story spoke to you, subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to remember their worth today. Welcome to Boardroom Revenge Stories, a channel focused on workplace conflict, corporate betrayal, power struggles, and quiet justice. Our stories follow a structured workflow to deliver a consistent, immersive experience. We start by analyzing real discussions on Reddit, Facebook, Quora, and blogs. Next, we craft original scripts using AI tools like ChatGPT. We then use 11 labs to transform text into high-quality voice and edit everything in CapIt for a smooth cinematic finish. Thumbnails are designed with Canva and every video is carefully reviewed before release. These stories go beyond entertainment, revealing how power truly works and how justice quietly unfolds. Happened. Then my phone began to buzz on the table once, twice, then again and again. So fast it sounded angry. I looked at the screen. Marissa, then Hal, then an unknown number from the office. A notification flashed across the top. Where are the Crestline support docs? Another message followed. Kira, call me immediately. I turned the phone over. Then I packed black dress, laptop, charger, Dad's old denim jacket that still hung in my closet from the last time he visited. I folded it carefully, slower than everything else, and placed it on top of my bag. At 7:36, the phone was still vibrating. At 7:40, I turned it off. The ride to the airport felt unreal. People were drinking coffee, dragging suitcases, complaining about traffic, while my life had split in two at the counter. The agent handed me a boarding pass to Indianapolis. I took it, breathed once, and walked toward security. For the first time in 3 years, Aldenbridge could wait. The flight was crowded, loud, and ordinary in a way that made me feel almost invisible. A child kicked the back of my seat. Someone across the aisle argued softly about a hotel reservation. The woman beside me watched a cooking show with captions on. Life kept moving around me, completely unaware that mine had stopped. When the plane touched down in Indianapolis, I turned my phone back on, out of habit. It lit up instantly. Missed calls, voicemails, emails. Marissa's name appeared so many times it almost looked like a warning. Hal's messages came after hers. Shorter at first, then longer, then sharper. I didn't open any of them. Not yet. Let them feel the silence for once. I picked up a rental car, a white sedan with a cracked phone mount, and a faint smell of lemon cleaner, then drove south toward Bloomington. The highway stretched ahead under a dull gray sky. With every mile, the office felt smaller. Marissa's voice faded. Hall's panic became background noise. What remained was my father. His house sat at the end of a narrow street lined with old maples, low brick, dark shutters, porch steps slightly uneven because he always said he would fix them next weekend. I stood outside for nearly a minute before unlocking the door. The smell hit first. Sawdust, black coffee, old paperbacks, machine oil from the garage. Home. His boots were still beside the entryway, one tipped slightly to the side. A half-empty mug sat near the sink. Brown ring dried around the inside on the kitchen table. His reading glasses rested open on a newspaper folded to the sports section. I touched the chair he always sat in, and that was when the loss became real. Later, I went into the garage. His tools hung in careful rows: clamps, chisels, screwdrivers. Jars of screws labeled in his square handwriting in the bottom drawer of the workbench. I found the old metal tin of baseball cards, bundled with rubber bands exactly the way he kept them. I sat on the cold floor holding that tin, breathing through the ache for the first time all day. I felt broken, but I also felt steady. The garage grew darker as evening settled over Bloomington. I was still sitting near the workbench when my phone vibrated against the concrete floor. I let it buzz until it stopped. Then it started again. Marissa, a few seconds later. Howell Whitmore. Then Marissa again. I finally picked it up. Not to answer, just to look. 21 missed calls. 7 voicemails. A string of emails with subject lines that grew more desperate by the hour. Urgent Crestline documentation issue. Immediate response required. Kira, we need to discuss your resignation. By the third email, Marissa had stopped pretending this was routine. The migration dashboard had gone dark. Reporting functions were failing. The client team at Crestline was asking why their launch environment could not sync. Someone had tried to rebuild one of my process maps from memory and broken 3 dependent work. I almost smiled, but it did not feel like victory. It felt like gravity. They had spent 3 years acting like the system ran by magic. Now the magician had gone home to bury her father, and all they had left were empty folders and panic. Near midnight, another message came in from Hal. Can we schedule a quick call tomorrow? We want to understand what happened and find a path forward. Also, we are sorry about your father. I read that sentence twice. Funny how grief became visible once it interfered with revenue. I set the phone on the workbench beside my father's tape measure and opened my laptop. The kitchen clock ticked from the other room. I created a meeting invite for exactly 2 p.m. Eastern, right in the middle of their Crestline deadline. Then I replied, tomorrow at 2 p.m. works. I will send the invite. No apology, no explanation, no warmth. For years, they had decided when my time mattered, when my exhaustion counted, when my emergencies could be delayed. Not anymore. I closed the laptop and looked around the garage, at the tools my father had earned, used, and respected. For the first time, they were waiting on me. At 1:59 p.m., I sat at my father's kitchen table with a cup of coffee in his chipped blue mug. The meeting link glowed on my laptop screen. I waited until the clock changed, then clicked join. Hal appeared first. His collar was crooked, his eyes red around the edges. Marissa joined a second later, lips pressed tight, looking like she had prepared an argument before preparing an apology. A third window opened beside them. A woman in a navy blazer adjusted her glasses. Legal. Hal cleared his throat. Kira first. We're very sorry for your loss. I said nothing. He blinked, glanced at Marissa, and she took over. We need access restored to the Crestline documentation. The migration is unstable, and your resignation created a serious operational gap. My resignation didn't create the gap, I said. It revealed it. The legal woman leaned forward. Any materials developed in connection with company operations may be considered work product. I took a slow sip of coffee. Not those materials. No client data. No proprietary source code. No internal confidential files. Those were my personal notes, my personal troubleshooting guides, my training outlines, and my process maps built after hours because Aldenbridge refused to document its own systems. Marissa's jaw tightened. You shared them with the team. I let the team use them while I was there. Hal rubbed his forehead. We need a solution. I have one. For the first time, all 3 of them stopped talking. I'm not coming back as an employee. I'm not restoring anything to your drives, but I will consult. $300 an hour, 20-hour minimum paid up front. I'll walk your people through the missing processes and answer technical questions within scheduled windows. Marissa snapped. That's unreasonable. No, I said calmly. Unreasonable was telling me to stream my father's funeral because your migration mattered more. Her face changed just slightly. Hal exhaled. We'd need finance approval. Then talk to finance. Cressling's clock is still running. The legal woman looked down and started typing. Hal nodded slowly. Send the agreement. I will.